All right, here with Cody Rich for this episode. Cody Rich is from the Rich Outdoors podcast, and then owner CEO. What do you call yourself for Backcountry Fieldhouse?
Not CEO, but I guess owner, chief bottle washer, janitor, whatever.
No, all of it.
Yeah.
What would be your title for all the things that you do? Would you call yourself an entrepreneur, a guy in the outdoor industry? What would you say?
That's a funny question, man. And it pops. I hate answering this question. My wife laughs because like we'll go to dinner or something, and one of her friends like, "Oh, what do you do?" And I'm like, God, I don't know. I don't know how to explain this, because it's like this. It's a tough thing, and I think entrepreneurs struggle with it, like imposter syndrome. And I think for a long time, I really struggled calling myself an entrepreneur. I just feel like I hadn't really made it yet, and I still do to some degree. But I guess for 10 years, I guess it's 10 years now into the entrepreneurship thing. You kind of got to take the badge, the label, for the good or the bad. So I guess I call myself an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur, whatever you want to call it. I'm in the outdoor space. I don't know if I really consider myself an entrepreneur in the outdoor industry, but I guess I am. I guess you could say that. Again, I struggle with that question.
I do freelance writing on the side, but I'm a high school teacher, so it took me a long time of a couple of years of writing a weekly column until I called myself a writer because it was such a small percentage of my income. Yeah. I didn't think I had. I didn't have the credentials to call myself that.
For sure.
Once you take ownership of it, you give yourself permission to do it, then you can do more in that space.
For sure. And I think writer is another one of those that people struggle with. They call themselves a writer. It's you don't know if you've earned the title yet, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. As far as the entrepreneurs type stuff go, was that something that you wanted to kind of do things on your own speed or at your own pace or on your own from an early age? Like, would your high school English teacher have said, "Oh yeah, Cody would totally be an entrepreneur later on"?
Mrs. Mays. The funny thing about that is probably, but it's not out of like the inventiveness so much as like I just didn't play well with others. Like to a certain degree, like I was not good with authority. There's a lot of faults. There's a lot of things like my high school English teacher would tell you that were wrong with me. That inherently later in life, turns out to make great qualities in an entrepreneur. Like never doing what they're told. Turns out that's a good trait for an entrepreneur. Like not listening to no and all these things. And so I don't know if it was that I thought I was going to be an entrepreneur when I was a kid. It just I think those traits end up coming out that way in a matter of like I just always want to do things my way, and I never took no as like, oh, okay, that's how it is. Like I can distinctly remember certain events, like people would be like, well, this can't be done. I'm like, well, why not? And it was like it's almost a push to go see if you can do it. And as a child, those are terrible traits. So like you don't want those in a kid, but it turns out that's the mandatory curriculum for an entrepreneur, so to speak.
Yeah. When I started teaching, I kind of saw that if you try to mandate kids into like a submissive sort of, you will sit there, you will be quiet, and you will learn whether you like to or not. Like that's not going to work.
For sure.
And it was not fun for me as a teacher. And so it sounds kind of weird, but like selective or controlled independence, let the kid be him or herself, but not distracting everybody else. It's kind of it's a
fine line, right?
It's a dance.
Yeah. And that's an interesting one, but it's a fine line. It's a dance of I do think structure is really important. Like, these schools that just want to let kids do whatever the hell they want. Like, I think my work ethic stems from the stern discipline. I grew up on a farm that was very, very strict, and like I got yelled at a lot. And I think work ethic comes from structure, right? Like you can't just tell a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old like, oh, just go free will peace and let them do whatever they want. And somehow that develops work ethic. Maybe, but in my case, I don't think it did. I think those are you're a product of your environment, and that's what it turns out later in life. And I don't think it was ever planned that way, which is kind of happenstance more so. But maybe entrepreneurship is purely a personality trait, though.
Yeah, there are certain things I wouldn't be surprised if some of my students ended up being entrepreneurial, but other times you have this sort of self-destructive almost, I can't follow through with anything. I want to just buck the system for the sake of bucking the system. Like, you might have to play the game a little bit, right? Play the game until you know, or, you know, you have that work ethic to be able to, and you have an idea, right? You know, people like to cite all these people who dropped out of high school or college and like, well, they had a, you know, $1 billion idea and $1 billion work ethic. If you don't have that, then, you know, maybe jump through the hoops.
Do you ever just look at kids and be like, wow, you're either going to be a complete failure or a billionaire? I'm not really sure which one.
It's so hard because you don't want to judge them, you know, but after 16 years of teaching, you can look at kids and say, you know, I've seen kids go down that path and they have to figure it out for themselves. Like, I could save you some time. Okay, I'm just listen here. I know what you're trying to do. You're doing the independence thing. You're doing the whatever. You know, just come back. Save yourself some stress. I have a good idea how this ends. But, you know, some of those kids, you hear what they ended up doing. You're like, yeah, I had no doubt that you're going to be successful. You know, you struggled to get B's and C's, but, you know, you have charisma. You're a good person. You know, you're a connector. Like, you're going to be fine. You know, don't worry about everyone else is getting 4.0s, going to big colleges. You're going to be fine.
Yeah.
So, speaking of being fine, at what point did you know that this entrepreneurial thing was going to stick as an adult and kind of, you know, career? Like you said,
you say that like it's already happened. I don't know that it's ever happened. And, you know, that's a part of being an entrepreneur. I think if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to be able to operate in that space of being fine with the fact that it may not work out. You know, and this goes back to like the types of personalities and the types of kids. Like, as an entrepreneur, as you know, anyone who wants to go out and try their own thing or do their own thing, that person has to have a certain belief that, you know what, even if it all falls apart, I can pick the pieces back up, I can transition, I'm going to learn from that and keep on going in the next direction. So to say that like, oh, I figured it out and I knew that this was going to work, I don't. But I do see, like, I see a lot of entrepreneurs, and I've helped so many entrepreneurs, and I love helping other entrepreneurs, but you watch so many people so scared to jump into the deep end. And in entrepreneurship, whatever it may be, like chasing your dreams, being in the outdoor industry, things like that, they're scary, right? Like, because it's not what you were supposed to do as a kid. It's not, you know, it's not the chosen route. You know, it's not the lawyer, doctor, banker, what fill in the blank. There's no security, right? And I think that's the hard part, is you have to have that type of personality that can go, okay, I'm going to try to figure this out, but if not, I'll just transition from that point. And I think so many people are scared to like start their first business or do that thing without knowing exactly what the route looks like to get back on, you know, wherever it may be. Like, you know, if I want to start that t-shirt business, what if it fails? And like, that's scary, right? Because to humans, the unknown is scary, and not having that security of, okay, where's my paycheck going to come from? And then it gets more difficult as you get older, as you know, most people will realize, like, man, you have kids, you have a family, like, I can't take this risk, I can't jump off. And so, like, for me, I guess I was a little bit lucky and I got into entrepreneurship at an early age, but I also just didn't. I knew there was a certain point where I knew, like, I tasted just enough to know that, like, I'm burning the ships and I'm all in on this, man. Like, I want this more than anything. And I don't feel like I'm successful. I don't feel like I've made it in any way, shape, or form. But I know that I'm 33 right now. I'm just getting started. And like, that's what I love about it, is I love what I do. I love building companies. I love building businesses. I love making it up as I go and trying to figure it out. And I think that's the most important trait, if you will. It's not that I knew, okay, I'm safe now. I've made it now. Because like, as you grow as an entrepreneur, as you grow as a person, the problems just keep getting bigger and bigger. And like that potential to reset to zero is almost always there. And you're never going to get away from it. Like, even, I'm probably 45 or 50 and, 10, 15 years from now, I'm sure there's going to be scares, issues, fires, whatever you want to call it, that have that potential to reset to zero. And, I just guess I'm kind of fine with that. Mm-hmm. That's okay for me.
Yeah. You talk a lot about going from the 101 to the 201 in mule deer hunting and elk hunting and whatnot. But what about entrepreneurship, right? We talked about, or you mentioned that a lot of people have an idea, but they're too scared to start the idea. But then as soon as you start something, you almost immediately are unsuccessful or have some sort of conflict.
Right.
The first article I sent into somewhere, they said, okay, we don't want it. I'm like, well, I just got the courage to do this, and then I'm shot down. So how do you get from that beginning stage of doing it to following through to get that 201 level of entrepreneurship and fighting through and keep going?
Man, that's an interesting question. And for someone like this is like the thing we created in the last year is like, this is our statement. I had not thought about that. So like, good on you for like drawing a question that I hadn't really thought about. And I'm just going to fall back to like what I believe in. So within the 101, 201 concept of hunting, we talk about taking your hunting to the 201 level. And for me, what that means is like a 101 is walking around hoping to get lucky. And a 201 is someone who's consistently doing the thing. And for the most part, we talk about hunting. But I think if I transition that to entrepreneurship, I don't know that it would change. It's just having the consistency, and I think the biggest piece that jumps out right off the tip of my tongue when I first think about that is being able to fail faster. When you start out, and just like you said, you send your article and you're like, I did it. When you get to that 201 level of entrepreneurship, you don't worry about the failures. I fail daily. I fail weekly, and it's just like it's not even a setback anymore. It's just like, okay, here's what we learned from that. Let's do this. And so the one thing, if I could go back to my early entrepreneurial whatever journey, career, I would say fail faster. And the hard part is I didn't know what that meant. And what it means is like I have to recover faster. So I have to learn faster. I have to do the things that fail. So I think when you start out in entrepreneurship or anything you do, you just like you expect to put this one thing out and it's gonna work. You're like, yep, I did it. Here's my thing. Like I created a company. I built a website. Now customers are going to come. And you're like, oh, then they don't. And I think when you become like a great writer, right? Like you realize that the book you wrote is going to have like 52 drafts that never even hit the table, let alone got cut. Like there's just so many versions. And you have to write so you can cut so much out. And I think entrepreneurship is much in the same way. Like the 201 level is just not being romantic about your ideas, not being just so married to them that you're not willing to cut them from, the editing table, and being able to move quickly. And that's like the 201 to me is like, okay, we're starting this company. Here's my idea. And we do this a lot. We'll say, okay, man, we have the greatest marketing idea in the world. And then it fails. It falls on its face. You're like, well, that didn't work. Is it over? No. Cool. I just learned how not to do it. As Edison said, I learned how not to build a light bulb. And it's the same way. It's like, keep testing and do these things. And the faster you can do them, the better. And I think that's huge for people is because like, if you spend 6 months building this website and it doesn't work, you wasted 6 months. If I just like put a test version out in one day, I'm like, it's not perfect. It's pretty crappy, but you know what? We're going to see. And if I get some traction, I'm like, oh, cool. What if I did this? And then what if I did this? And like, when it comes to failing faster, it's just like, I want to keep making new iterations as quickly as I can. And instead of trying to make the perfect product, I want to just put things out and see how they go, see how they test. A buddy of mine came to me with an idea and he's like, hey, I got this business idea. I'm like, cool. And he tells me the business idea. And he's like, what do you think? And my response is like, it doesn't really matter what I think. I'm one person. You need 1,000 people to tell you what they think. And in order to do that, don't ask your friends because they're going to tell you great idea. And so I just told him like, hey, why don't you build a Facebook page and drive traffic to it, or build a website with a landing page and drive traffic to it via Facebook ads. It's not going to cost you much to build a one-page website, and you're going to drive traffic to it, and you're like, oh man, my traffic's costing me like $5 a click. Well, if I only convert 1% of those, that's real expensive. That's more than the product. There you go. It's not a very good business idea. And like these are like concrete examples, and that's just a way to fail really, really fast. Like I could do that in a weekend and see if that business idea works or if it doesn't work. Now, granted, there's a lot of variables there and we can fine tune, but it takes this like, I see a lot of people like, I have this business idea, and then they spend 6 months developing the business idea, and then it doesn't really pan out the way they want. Whereas if you can, how do I do it quickly? How do I do it faster? How do I fail faster? And those are the kinds of things I think a 201 level person can just do well.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I like about your podcast is you have stories, and the stories are interesting, but there's this desire in every episode, or at least the vast majority of the episodes, to connect people with information that's valuable, which is serving, right? Some people who do or have a business idea or have a podcast, it's just all about them telling stories, and they almost dare you to turn it off. Like, do you know who I am? Like, I am so important. I'm such an expert. I can say whatever I want, and you're not going to turn it off. So you have this serving way about it. How do you stay focused on serving rather than just growth? Because growth can sometimes distract people from the original purpose.
For sure. That's interesting you say that. And the podcast for me is like, I'm genuinely inquisitive person. Like, I want to know these things. And for the most part, like, I'm just asking questions that I would ask. People like, oh, you ask really great questions. Like, oh, I'm just curious about that. Like, it's, I don't know if it's anything other than my sheer inquisitiveness that like incites like the right questions. But when you talk about like growth versus a good product, right? Like, and for me, it's kind of always, I just never really cared. I didn't necessarily start the podcast to be the biggest podcast. Like, I don't plan on competing with Meat Eater. They have a great podcast. They do stuff totally different. It's just not me, like I don't, there's things you can always do to reach the broader masses. But what happens when you try to reach the broader masses, in some cases, you get away from what you are or what, drives you. And so take a writer, for example. You're a writer, and I keep going back to this. But if a writer was like, oh man, I could reach so many more people if I wrote about, I don't know, soccer. I just throw something out there. But if you're not interested in soccer, then how well are you going to be writing about it? And so in the same capacity, like I do think it's always this like balancing point of trying to reach a broad audience or trying to reach something that's worth reaching, and keeping it something like you want to be interested in, what you want to talk about. I'm genuinely inquisitive about tactics. Like, that's why I started the podcast. Like, I remember thinking, God, magazine articles are so boring and so paper thin. And we just have these like repeat articles that are like how to kill your biggest buck in December. And it's like a 500 word, article. And I was like, man, I just want to like deep dive into these conversations. And so I've tried to stick to that. And that's what is interesting. And, good stories are interesting. Everyone loves good stories. I mean, I love hearing a good hunting story. And so I always try to lean back. And in the early years, I did struggle with this. I'll be completely honest. I would look at other podcasts and be like, man, they're crushing it. Like, why are they doing so much better than me?
After years of fine print contracts and getting ripped off by big wireless providers, if we've learned anything, it's that there's always a catch. So when I first heard that Mint Mobile offers premium wireless starting at just $15 a month, I thought, what's the catch? But after talking to them and using their service, it all made sense. There isn't one. Mint Mobile's secret sauce is that they're the first company to sell wireless service online only. They cut out the cost of retail stores and pass those sweet savings directly to you. For anyone who hates their phone bill, Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for just $15 a month. I was hesitant about having to get a new phone and a new phone number, but with Mint, you can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and keep your same phone and your same phone number along with all of your existing contacts. Mint Mobile gives you the best rate whether you're buying for one or for a family, and at Mint, families start at 2 lines. All plans come with unlimited talk and text plus high-speed data delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Switch to Mint Mobile and get premium wireless service starting at just $15 a month. To get your new wireless plan for just $15 a month and to get the plan shipped to your door for free, go to mintmobile.com/waypoint. That is mintmobile.com/waypoint. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/waypoint.
But I had to just be like, okay, why are you doing this? And what interests you? Like, what do you want to keep doing? And that's important because, 4 years down the line, I don't think I'd still be doing it if I wasn't interested in it. Wouldn't be as passionate about it. And I think that's what comes out when you hear a good podcast or a good podcast host. It's someone who's really passionate about what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I started writing, especially when I moved back to Alaska, I'm like, do I really want to ruin my Steelhead River by getting it published in a magazine? Like I get money for it, but then, you know, I'm inviting someone or telling, you know, where to go and fish this hole with this. I don't think I want that. And then with the podcast, you know, choosing the mediocre Alaska, like, well, that sounds like you don't know what you're doing. Like, well, I'm a lot closer to not knowing what I'm doing than I am to be an expert. Like everybody pretends to, or a lot of people pretend to be experts, but I wanted to be more that. You know, I did a lot of Bill Heavey reading, you know, back page for Field and Stream, and Patrick McManus. Like, those guys were great. They were obviously competent, but it's that lighter side, you know, and so many people, they go through that struggle, and to not take themselves so seriously and write about, like, what it's like to be your ordinary person. And so I kind of chose to do that because it's a lot more fun to talk about and write about stuff and just say, you know what, hey, here's how I screwed up this week. And that's been a lot of fun. So I like that about.
I'm curious, like, as a writer, what made you want to start a podcast?
As a writer, you do an interview and you take out what you think is important and you try to tell a story. And I think sometimes there's a temptation for the writer to make it more about them than the person. And there's a potential for things to be taken out of context. Even with outdoor writing, you know, and fishing and whatnot, you're trying to encapsulate an entire person's story in, you know, 700 words, and it's so difficult to do. So the podcast was great because you could just, it's long form, you know, it's so many more details. It's the entire transcript, you know, there's everything about the interview, so you can listen to it and you can pick up some things that wouldn't make it to the article because you have to, you know, here's your lead, and then it hooks the reader, and then you go through all that. So it was just another way of the outdoors, talking about it, and then, you know, especially like a voice for Ketchikan. You don't hear a lot of people in podcasts about actual Ketchikan people. People go through Ketchikan on their way to Prince of Wales, or, you know, whatever it is, and so just to kind of give a voice to some of the local people.
You want to know a funny thing? My dad, when I was a little kid, went fishing in Ketchikan, and I had a shirt from Ketchikan, and it's like, I don't know what it is, like, you know, fish and fishing poles and stuff. It just said Ketchikan, Alaska on it, and so like, man. I grew up and I had a T-shirt. I wore it for a long time. I don't know where it is today. Probably gone, but.
Yeah, it's funny how many people have been to Southeast, you know, and when I'm from Ketchikan, like, whoa, you're from Ketchikan, and it's almost like people go there to fish, but they don't know anyone who actually lives there, which is one of the really nice things, and people kind of miss out when they just come, you know, up here, stay at the lodge or stay at the property or get flown out somewhere. You know, you don't get to meet the people, you know, like, oh, that kid that's helping with the bags, or that kid that's cutting your fish, you know, they were on the national championship academic decathlon team 2 years ago, or they won state in basketball, or, you know, you get a feel for what the town is and what people who endure the worst part of the year, you know, what are they like? And so when I go out of state to other places, I kind of want to get a feel for it.
I'm sorry, I'm like totally stealing your show as a co-host here. What's the most underrated thing in Ketchikan? Like, if I ever do go fishing in Ketchikan and I'm like, I need to not be that asshole and actually pay attention to the town, what's like the one thing that no fishing people do? Like, you know, say you go fishing, what's the one thing you should do outside of that?
That's a really tough one, because for some people it's going to be like a hike. But for some people, hiking has been totally ruined, because if they're not hiking to go fish or hiking to go hunt, it's like, well, it's okay. I think it's the story behind some of the people. And a lot of the high schoolers have jobs here. You know, you could have a 17-year-old kid who's your kayak guy.
That's crazy.
And you would think it would be some person who's been, you know, kayaking forever and they're like whitewater certified. But, you know, this is the local kid. You know, this kid has a 3.8 GPA. They have college aspirations, and they're your kayak guide. You know, if I think back to some of the kids that I've taught, like, I wouldn't trust a lot of those kids with any responsibility, right? But some of these kids are managing people, and you have people off the cruise ship who are yelling at this kid because, you know, the bus was late or something. You know, this is a 17-year-old kid you're yelling at, you know. So I think just that, you know, that local vibe and getting the local stories, or seeing, you know, some of the locals fish, just as an observer. You know, you can do what you want. You can have a lot of fun with the fishing and with the hiking and with the hunting and then everything, but also just, hey, what is it like to live here year round? And that's that second part of the story. That's just something that a lot of people miss out on.
Whenever I travel somewhere, there's always like, the 3 restaurants that the hotel tells you to go to. And I always try to avoid the top, restaurant, touristy places. I don't like touristy. And so like, I prefer like the kind of low end dive restaurant that only the locals go to. That's kind of my MO when it comes to the travel, or I guess being a tourist. I don't want to be around other tourists.
Yeah, that's the same thing, and just having that eye for it, because a lot of people resent out of towners, especially in the fishing hunting industry. It's some guy came up from somewhere else, and he epitomized all that was bad about the tourist or this person. Corked you when you were hunting. Just basic sort of hunting ethics. They came right in front of you, like, dude, come on, it's not my mountain. But still, it doesn't mean that because you're a public landowner, you can go do whatever you want. And so, it's being conscious of those sort of things, and like knowing that while it's public land, I'm still in someone else's backyard. I don't live here year round, and kind of being conscious of that, and just being as local as possible without pretending to be a local, I think is kind of the funnest part of it.
For sure. And it's funny that we still almost have this like territorial type about us, even though like the world is so broad and global at this point. Like, who's this guy?
We're all on the same team, but like, but we're not. Yeah, it's like, hey, I love that people fly fish. Just don't fly fish here. Ever,
yeah.
Right. I love that there's hunters, and we're all, it's something, but we're also not something. It's kind of weird, but
it's funny because
I guess it happens.
Like I moved to Montana in 2017, and instantly, like, I'll see an Oregon plate. I'm like, who is this guy? Who does he think he is? Like, granted, I've hunted Montana since like 2011 and have been a non-resident, but it's like instantly, it's like, what is going on around here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I grew up on Prince of Wales Island, so from when I was 5 until after I graduated college, and then I taught in California for 10 years. And I've been back for 7 years, but I still have my 209 California area code on my phone because it doesn't pay. I know, and so I'm like, oh, there's a California number. I'm like, no. I grew up in Klawock, right? And now I teach at the high school here in Ketchikan, and so they're like, oh, okay, well, why would you hang on to that area? So I got to get rid of it. But yeah, it's funny. I even chastise myself. But.
Oh, it's funny how like California's the worst of it too. Like you can't get away with that. I mean, it's terrible.
No. But you think about if there was a paradise, and you look back 150, 200 years, it would be hard to beat California as far as climate, as far as stuff to hunt, fish. Like the Central Valley of California is unbelievable.
For sure. And like you said, like
100
years, it's just ridiculous. Yeah. We have this conversation. I was home, and my family settled a part of Oregon in the late 1800s, and not very good ground. Not ideal ground, right? And like I always think about that, like you basically had your pick of where to go. And at this particular time, my mom and I were talking. My mom goes to wineries and vineyards and these things. And in Oregon, a lot of the really, really, really crappy farm ground that would have been, early 1900s, even like before any time, like the people that settled this really just awful farm ground. Like they came all the way and like they're in hill country and they can't farm anything. Now it's like pristine vineyards and they have like max value and the wineries and this and that. And I'm like, man, like, if only they could have known. Because at one point, I'm sure they're like, man, we kind of got the short straw here on the ground. That we got here and there was nothing left over but the hill ground. And turns out 100 years later, it's the most prized, or it's the prime ground, which is just kind of comical to me. I don't know why.
Yeah. It's weird now. When I was down in Wyoming this summer, just looking at the huge expanse of land and then looking at OnX and just seeing it's all private. Or a lot of it was private. And then where I was hunting antelope, that's great that the private landowners allow people to hunt on it. But you just think, in some of these areas, what would you do with the land? And if you wanted to buy some land, you can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
Like it's the type of stuff that you could afford is so small, but then it's not going to pay for itself.
Well,
and it is also funny and ironic that as a public, I want access to these areas, but if I were to win the lottery or something, first thing I'd do, I'd like buy a little plot of land on like the Frying Pan River or somewhere on the North Platte. I would privatized it, so only my friends could go
Yeah.
there. It's totally ironic.
Well, we were, and just because I know where you were at, we were down in the little town of Carbon County, and it's so crazy to go through there and just be like, man, at some point, people are like, yep, I'm moving to Carbon, like Carbon County, Wyoming.
Mm-hmm.
Like, man, that's some desolate. Like, it had to have been real bad where they came from to want to go there.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's fun to get that frame of reference though, and just see, because otherwise you only hear about stuff, and so the news reports telling you what it's like in these other areas, and so you get this really oversimplified stereotype of what it's like. But going and seeing it for yourself and be like, oh well, it's just as bad as I thought, or it's way better, or well, I don't really know what to think of it, and we're just going to keep driving.
Yeah, no, for sure. Sorry, we got off on a tangent there.
So. Oh no! Tangents to that's where it's
Okay,
at,
good.
man. This is my English class is a lot about tangents, but
Yeah.
that's the way to do it. So you've been doing tons of you're in the hundreds of podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
How many podcasts do you think you've done?
What I just did a post, I think 415 plus ish. I saw it somewhere in there. 415. Yeah.
Joe Rogan talked on his podcast about when he goes to like a party and there's a bunch of actors there,
Mm-hmm.
how it seems like all the actors are just auditioning or they're pretending to be someone else. So just like this really sort of fake sort of way, no one's really real here. Everyone's like auditioning or everyone's pretending to be someone else. So how do you keep from being like a production, like someone who's just trying to come up with the best sound bites? And how do you keep that authenticity where the more interesting you are, the better the podcast, but are you just this quote machine? Like, how do you stay legit and not over commercialize or dilute your message?
Man, that's a really good question. I don't know if I have the answer. Like, I don't know if I've perfected that. But I can totally see what they're talking about. It's easy to do so. Maybe it goes back to like the fact that I'm asking questions. Like, I don't feel like I get talked about a lot, which is fine by me. I don't want it that way. And so like I do a podcast with you, and I feel like I talk about myself more on other people's podcasts than on my own. Maybe that's the answer. I don't really know. That's a great question. I don't really have the answer for. But maybe it's a personality thing. I do see a lot of people who, I don't want to say get big-headed, but let's just say get big-headed. And I think from the very beginning, like that's one thing I've always wanted to avoid, like more than anything. Like if anything, when I started the podcast, I had a fear of fame. Like I don't think I'm like famous by any stretch of imagination. Just like that's always been a fear of mine. That like never wanted my head to get big or become a different person or change who you are, because I watched so many people and I watched people I knew who had kind of graduated through the ranks of AKA fame or whatever, and it changed them, right? And like that, so it's always been this like weird thing. Fame and money have always I've always looked at them as like, man, that's the thing that changes you, that you can't control, and that's always scared me a little bit, and so I really keep that in check. And I just try to be cognizant of it, like staying to who you are, and just remembering at the end of the day you're nobody. Like you're only here for a spick of time. Like you're just a small blimp on the radar.
Yeah, one of the things that goes along with that is I think the money and the fame changes you, but also the reason some people like you is because you aren't famous yet, or because you're not big yet, and you have that authenticity. So then, once you do become big, everything that person liked about you no longer exists. And it's not really your fault, but it's just the circumstances changes, and every attribute that you had, you no longer have.
Yeah.
And it's like good for you because you made it, but at the same time, it's like with bands, right? Oh, the first album was better. As soon as they got big, they're sellouts.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but that's kind of the goal. To some degree,
the same way. It's always it's very interesting, right? And you say that, like bands. People like bands because they're the unknown band. When we become the known band, it's like, yeah, you're a sellout. Companies are the same way, though. Like if you really looked at it, Walmart's the American dream, and everybody hates them.
Yeah,
and it's like this is what you dream of as any person, you grow up in America, you can do whatever you want, you chase your dreams and do the thing you love, and you create it and you make it, and then all of a sudden people hate you because you're big, and it's a funny oxymoron, really.
Yeah, I'm not sponsored by anybody or anything, so it's kind of nice. I can just talk freely. I don't like to badmouth companies or anything like that, but I love Stone Glacier because they have that feel, and everybody there. I don't know anybody from there, but just every interaction that I've had, they seem that it's that serve people first. And I think on their website they describe themselves as a nimble company. So they just have that way about that's a serve first, that it's small, but you just want to follow it. Like you just want to buy more stuff. Like, hey, I love your packs, but if they broke, I could buy more stuff. And it's just a great company.
I think that's Lyle and I talk a lot about this. And this is why Lyle and I get along so well. Lyle's kind of the head marketing, head branding guy for Stone Glacier, and him and I get along really well because it's like authenticity first. Like, and this is a product of everything that has happened before our generation, and it's kind of just this big companies and these mantras, and like everyone did the same thing for a long time and nobody was authentic. Like authenticity just lost its way probably all through the 90s, the 80s, whatever you want to call it. And everyone was so politically correct. So everyone was like every message was so polished and so this or so that you begin to like just feel it wasn't real, right? And when you see someone who's real, you latch onto it. And maybe like they're not as polished as they should be or whatever. And I think that's probably why people like listening to my podcast, mainly because I'm not very polished, right? And I say things I'm not supposed to say. And that's what people enjoy because they like that authenticity. They know you're being real. And man, I don't care what you want to do. If you want to be an entrepreneur, you want to be a writer, you want to be anything, like when in doubt, be authentic over perfect. And it goes back to like even building companies. Like I do 100% think like get something out there, be authentic, be who you are, and that's going to come out better than this is what I should say, or this is the politically correct thing to say. Now, granted, that can go too far, but for the most part, and I think you're right. Stone Glacier, man, they crush it with that. Like they're just them, and those guys like. Everyone's like, man, are Stone Glacier guys really like that? You watch them on Instagram. There's no faking it. It's just them. Like that's who they are, and that's the culture. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what you're going to see in the future is more companies that have that culture, have that vibe, have that authenticity, and they're just real people. And I think that's what's really going to excel. And you see it already. You see companies, you see people, you see entrepreneurs excelling, and the growth of the growth of personal brand. Like in the entrepreneur community, everyone's big on personal brand. They grow a personal brand to help build their company. And in some ways I do that as well. I try to avoid it a bit more than most, but that is a part of that. Like it shows the authenticity. So instead of buying from a company that I don't know, I'm buying from David. And David seems like the kind of guy I would drink a beer with, or the kind of guy I want to hang out with. So I'm going to buy David's product, And that's how we think. And the world has made it so open, right? 20 years ago, it was not as open. We didn't have Instagrams and social medias and all these things. Man, I'm getting close, 20 years. Maybe we go 30. 30 years ago, we didn't have these things. And for the most part, like, it's become so open that now we have like full visibility into companies. Like, who is this company? And that's going to change the whole dynamic of a lot of things, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the funny things about Jaden, who's new to your operation there, he was supposed to meet me for coffee in Laramie. And he was about 15 minutes late, and I'm just kind of waiting there, and he calls me, and he says, "Oh man, hey, sorry, I'm not going to be able to make it. I shot a bull." I'm like, "Dude, what? Why are you calling me? Go find your bull, man. He shot it last night, and he was up there." And I'm like, "Dude, what are you doing?" But that's just that idea of putting other people first, being considered. Like no one would have expected him to call or text, say, "Hey, you know what? I shot a bull. I'm going to find that." Sorry, like you'd have just gone and found the bull. But that just shows that that type of person. I was like, dude, this guy's
Yeah, Jaden's my right hand man, and he's he almost does more with backcountry fuel than I do these days. But yeah, and that's just Jaden. And actually, I remember that conversation because Jay was like, he felt so bad, right? Like he was like, oh, it's like, God, I screwed this up. Like I was supposed to go to this meeting. He's like, all these things, and like you said, like that's being a good person.
Yeah, and I think in the hunting industry, you see a lot of people, and the way it's represented, a lot of the smaller YouTube type, this person, it's just like people are rubbing their antlers on social media. Just look at how bad I am. You look at how I've conquered Alaska, or I've conquered all this stuff. I'm just the best at stuff. So to find people who are just legitimately kind and run their businesses with that serve first attitude, like that's the stuff that you want to follow, you want to support, you want to do that stuff. And you can definitely find it. The stereotypical hunter exists, but we're not what we're portrayed by other people or by the naysayers or the anti-hunters.
What's interesting about that is, I remember a while ago, and this has happened a few times where people will reach out to me and say, oh, "Man, how did you get in the hunting industry? Like, I want to be in the hunting industry. Look at what I've killed," and I don't know if that's like a mindset. Like, it has nothing to do with your accomplishments. No one's paying you for your accomplishments. They're paying you because you're the type of person that they want to represent, or they want this type of person to represent their company and things like this. And so when kids, I use that term kind of loosely, but when kids, anybody, wants to get paid for the thing they love, it's not based on your accomplishments entirely. If you've killed all the world record critters in Alaska, there's something to be said for that. But at the end of the day, if you're a kind of a POS, or you're just not a great person to be around, I don't want to have you represent my company. And so I see a lot of people that have this misinterpretation that they think, the things they've done or the things they've killed grant them some kind of entitlement or access or like privilege, or that should get them in the industry. Like, well, why are you in the hunting industry? I've killed more big elk than you have. That's not why I'm in the, that's not why you get to there. That's not why people pay you and these things. And so it's like working backwards from that. And I don't know if, your audience has people who are interested in like, how do I make money doing what I love or these type of things. But like as a broad picture, like that's kind of just an observation, I guess.
Yeah. It's kind of funny. Some of the people who listen and I talk to, and like the legitimate Alaskans up here, a lot of them don't want any sort of press. They just go about and doing their thing. Like everybody knows. Like an alpha doesn't have to tell anybody. Like, everyone just knows. If you have to peacock, you're not the one. But these guys are just hardcore. If you're the one that's going on and posting about it, you might not be. Have you heard of the book by Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People?
Yeah, I've read that.
It's a great book, and you think that I have it up on my dry erase board at school. And I'm like, I know it sounds like if you have no friends, here's how to manipulate people into having friends. But it's just all about putting other people first.
Which is funny. Like, it's such a terrible title, right?
It is. Yeah. Well, that's, it was 80 years old or whatever it is. But yeah, just that idea of putting other people first. And is this about me or is this about someone else? And if you just entrepreneur live that way, it just makes a huge difference.
Yeah, that mindset is probably one of the greatest mindsets anybody can instill or pick up. It's not something you just pick up on a Tuesday, but like kind of develop is 51% to the other person with I have no worry. Like, say I do this podcast, right? Or, you come on my show. Like, I have no like, well, I did your show, so you need to come on mine or anything like that. It's like, I do things. I don't care. I help a lot of entrepreneurs. My wife's like, when are you going to start a consulting company? I was like, I don't do it for that. I have no reason to get anything back. I just do. And maybe it comes around, maybe it doesn't. I don't really care. It's not like I'm keeping a mental tab on who owes me a favor, but hopefully those pan out in the long run. Maybe they don't. Who knows? But it's like just doing things to provide 51% of the value.
Yeah. Final question here. We can go off another tangent if you have anything else to add to that. But I do want to ask you. You've been in the industry for a little while. What are the two most hated words in the industry? As far as marketing goes, I hate the term game changer, and I hate the term bomb-proof because nothing is bomb-proof and it gets overused. And then when you get like a really good thing, like this is really good, I like it a lot. But I don't want to say bomb-proof because someone used bomb-proof on like a pair of socks.
Yeah.
And then game changer, like if I'm going to glass until it's dark, I'm going to glass till it's dark. If something makes me warm, I'm still doing the same thing. I just happen to be more warm. That's not really a game changer. A game changer, I think, is like something that totally changes the way that I see everything, do anything. Like that's a game changer. But we dilute these great terms. So I will use them, but very cautiously, and I use a lot of qualifiers with them. But what are your most kind of hated words in the industry?
Hated words in the industry? God, that's a good question. I'm like drawing a blank right now. It was right on the tip of my tongue. I was like, there's a few, most of which I can't say. No. Yeah. I don't know. One of the things that bugs me, and I don't know if I can say this or not, but like one of the things that bugs me is like people saying like, oh, I killed this on public land, or I killed this DIY, or I killed this, like justifying, or like maybe even the private land thing, like, oh well, he killed it on private. And man, like it just rubs me the wrong way because it does feel like the us versus them within our own community. And I'm not, like, 99.99% of what I do is on public ground. But I don't want to use it as a crutch or whatever the opposite of a crutch is, right? Like, I don't want to be like, well, you killed on private, so I'm better than you. Like, man, that's, like, the first thing that comes to mind. I don't know if this is where you're going with this. But it's, like, that's the first thing that comes to mind is, like, the battle within the community for that type of, like, the thing I did was better than the thing you did for any particular reason. That I don't know.
Yeah,
that's tough.
There's a lot of negativity in it, so I don't want to be a negative person, but they're just like little pet peeves, and that DIY thing is kind of interesting too because you can go on like pre-scouted, fully furnished DIY things. You're like, wait, what?
Yeah, where's the line in the sand there? Like, Alaska is a good example of that. Like, the dude flew around all summer, scouted your moose, dropped you 1 mile away from it, and you DIY hunted it. I don't know if that counts.
Like, yeah. Well, that's that authenticity. Just be like, this is what it was, man. This guy did all the stuff for us. It was great.
Yeah.
I still made the shot. It was fun. But, here's what it is. I'm not going to pretend to make it any better than it was. Like, here are the facts, man. I had a great time. I don't really care. I don't need validation from you, man. I did it. It was fun. It was great. If you want to do that, then that's fine, man. If you want to do the whole lodge, the whole pampered everything, fine, man. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that.
One of the things that cracks me up is like people saying how far back things were or weren't. Like oh well, yeah, it was only a mile from the truck, but we had to hike 10 days, and then we killed it a mile from the truck. It's like, I don't know why you have to. I'd be stoked if it was a mile from. Like, I'd be stoked if it was 10 yards from the truck. Like, yes, this is like I don't know. I just feel like you do enough hunts, and I think I can appreciate the times where it works out really nicely.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think people romanticizing things being harder than they should be, or making things harder than they should be. Like, I'm all for a Sufferfest. I love them. But I also can appreciate when things go really well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny because I sometimes want to say, well, why?
Yeah.
Like, oh, we did this. Why?
Yeah.
And it's almost like, wait, you're supposed to acknowledge that I'm winning at this competition, and you're not supposed to ask me why.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be understood. But
for sure.
Yeah, sometimes I just, I didn't feel like going too far. I just kind of posted up here and got a buck, and there you go. Like, why do you shoot a fork? Like, because it was there, because it was nice, and because it's food. Like, I don't...
Totally. No, totally. So for a guy that is from Alaska, lives in Alaska, what's a dream hunt? Like, you already have all these.
Oh, man. Yeah, living in Southeast Alaska is different because it's all islands, and so we're not on the road system. We have elk down here. I drew an elk tag, and we got flown into this lake with two of my buddies who'd never killed anything before, and I had no idea what I was doing. Beautiful day, and it ended up being just a wonderful 3-day camping trip. But it's just the Edelin Island hunt is just. It's rugged, and there's nothing there. There's a small little spot with cell phone reception, which is weird, but you know, it's thick, and the forest down south is thick, but you have so much of the brush that comes up underneath, and it's desolate, and there are, you know, cliffs that are hidden, and
so before we get to
but
your dream hunt, I do want to say I have been putting in for that hunt in hopes to draw it, just because the odds are better. And I grew up in Western Oregon. I cut my teeth hunting Roosevelt elk in Western Oregon, and I texted Robert Hanneman, and I was like, hey, you know, the Edelin Island hunt, like, better, worse, what? He's like, man, it's really thick. And I'm like, I'm from Oregon. Like, are we talking, like, how thick are we talking? Like, so I'm curious. Is it like, what on a scale of 1 to 10, how thick are we talking? Like, brick wall thick? Briar patch thick?
It's like in some areas you have to go down backwards, and it's just that everything is tangled together, and then there's no release.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes you get through like a patch, and on the other side it's open. But once you get down into the timber, it's just nonstop, and it's steep all the way down to the shore.
Yeah.
There's just no break, and there's no openness. I've driven through Oregon and done some fishing on the Umpqua and some of those. So yeah, it's pretty thick there, but it's relentless, and it's wet and no relief. Miserable. But if you get above it, man, it's beautiful.
I mean, this is gonna like counterintuitive. What we were just talking about, people like making things harder than they should. But like, I kind of want to do that hunt. Like, I don't know why.
Yeah, it's awesome, man. Because there's always part of the hunt that you want to get somewhere that not a lot of people have been. You don't want to run into other people. You just want that sort of isolation.
Did you see anyone on the
for
hunt?
no other reason than just to be away? Oh no. Ironically, though, when we got picked up, it was $900 one way from Ketchikan, and when we got picked up, they had actually picked up part of someone else's elk. And so they gave us a discount because we were riding back with part of someone else's elk. And so, like, at our feet was like these game bags of this elk from this successful hunter that had got dropped off somewhere else. And we're just like, oh man, we didn't see hear shots or see anybody else or even, you know, hear the float plane that dropped them off. But it was kind of funny. It was like almost insult to injury, but at the same time, you know,
Totally.
You don't get something, but you know that happens. And it was like I said, it was a great trip, and
yeah, it does sound.
But back
really
to your
cool experience. Anyway, yeah, back to your dream animal.
The moose on a float hunt would be awesome. I know they're really difficult because like you're down in the water and you have to like you're kind of below them and you don't really get to see a whole lot. But a buddy of mine was on a float. He does he's just finished medical school up in Anchorage, and he does weekend warrior mountain goat, and he did a weekend warrior Dall sheep, and he did he had 2 or 3 days off. He did a float hunt, and you're just like, dude, this guy's crazy.
During med school?
But during med school, I'm like, how do you do that, man? That's not even fair. But he shot a moose within the first quarter mile of the float. So you talk about making it easy. It was right on the shore, quarter mile into the float. He's like, well, we could try to row back upriver, but we got 3 days, so they just floated down, and then his buddy shot one within a mile, I think, of the takeout. So you're just like, dude, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
I don't want to hike with a moose anywhere. Yeah. If I could just, but that would be a dream hunt. But also, man, the mule deer thing has got me. And then an elk down in Wyoming would be sweet, or Montana, or like one of those. Just something different, something new.
Yeah.
And when I was down there in Wyoming, that's just the terrain is beautiful and it's different, and like that's all great. Not a musk ox. Musk ox.
No, that's not your.
I don't have any. No, I don't have any desire to do that.
No,
but caribou for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you?
Stateside, probably a goat hunt. I mean, I won't do all the hunts, but like I would say if I had like within the 48, probably a mountain goat. Like that's kind of been the one that's in the back of my head. And then I don't know, for some reason I've had the itch to go to Russia and go elk hunting, just because it's like a completely different everything. So yeah, I've really been thinking about going to Russia and trying to do some elk hunting.
Wow, interesting. There you go. That's yeah. I figured it'd be like a red stag or something like that, but elk.
Right, I know it's like it's the same thing I hunt constantly, but it's like it would just be so foreign. I think I'm more interested. Like it'd be a really good excuse to go to Russia. I can guarantee if I don't hunt in Russia, I will never go to Russia. So it'd be cool to see it. Just go there. And if you're gonna go there, you might as well hunt elk.
Yeah, yeah. I've done a lot of fly fishing, and I actually fly fished before. I didn't start hunting until I was 31. But that idea of it's an elk, but it's a different elk that exists in so many different areas. Like I caught a brown trout in California, and I wanted to catch a big brown trout in Wyoming. And yeah, it's just a brown trout, and yeah, if I was blindfolded, I might not be able to tell where I am, But it's just that. There's something about it, it's the new experience, it's the new terrain. It's not just about the fish, it's about the fish and where it's at, or it's about the elk and where it's at. And it's a hard thing to articulate. It's a hard thing to really put into words, but people who understand it get it. People who don't, I don't think you could describe it in a way that's going to make them get it.
Yeah, and I think that's mostly what hunting is to me. I mean, a lot of it is this way to kind of check out, escape, just be one with nature, all this romantic stuff. But at the end of the day, like, hunting is what pushes me to new places, new things, and pushes to new, like, physical limits and these things, and like, helps me push myself. So, and I think maybe at a certain point you get to, like, okay, I've done the states, I've done most of the lower 48s, the old elk. Now maybe it's time to go to a different country and do the same thing. And I think there's some types of people that just want to go to a new species, but they don't really care about location. I have a weird infatuation with elk, and so and maybe that's why Alaska elk, that's almost like a foreign country when it comes to elk hunting. So like I think that's what pushes me is to elk wherever. Same with like a mountain kudu in Africa. Like I don't have much desire to go to Africa. Like if someone's like, hey, I got a free ticket to go to Africa, I would go. I don't think against it. I just don't have a huge desire to go to Africa. Having said that, when I hear my friends talk about hunting mountain kudu and how they're just like elk, I'm like, I'm in. Like that sounds cool. It's my mountain elk on a different continent. As far as I know, Antarctica does not have an elk, though. I'm pretty sure of it.
Well, that would be. You got a couple to do before then, but you want to have a couple that are in the realm of possibility, a couple that are kind of like the dream hunts, but then certain things just like I got to focus here first before I get crazy.
Exactly.
Any closing thoughts, man, or where can people find you and to give you a little pitch for the podcast and for the
appreciate just having the conversation. Everybody can check my podcast out, the Rich Outdoors podcast, wherever you found this one. And then the fuel box, we do a backcountry fuel. Guys from Alaska, I don't think take enough advantage of this because like a lot of this stuff, and we have some customers in Alaska that absolutely love it. There's a few guys that get like 3 or 4 boxes a month, and it always kind of makes me giggle because I know there's not a lot of these products can get to Alaska very easily, and you can't just go down to the local store and pick most of them up. So we do a monthly subscription box where we send out a box full of snacks and goodies, and I think if Alaskan residents should take full advantage of it. But check it out. It's backcountryfuelbox. .com.
Yeah. The thing that I like about it is that it's not only that you can get stuff in the box that you wouldn't be able to get at the store here, is that it's economical. Like if you do go and you get your just generic Cliff Bar or whatever, like those are going to be like $2.50 a pop. And so if you add up, like it's not only I'm getting good quality stuff, but when you add it up, it's cheaper than if you go to the store.
And it's funny when I started this company or whatever, like I didn't even cross my mind about Alaska, and then all of a sudden there's a few people getting Alaska because the shipping price, like it's free shipping for those guys. I guess we charge $3, and so like we're getting guys like doing 3-4 boxes, just getting cases of this stuff. I was like, I don't know if they're eating that much or if like there's a few guys in small town of wherever, Chicken, Alaska, that are just going and doing a party subscription.
Yeah. Well, that's the nice thing too, is that by going post office, FedEx in most places it either can't get there or it's going to be an astronomical price. So that's another key price point.
For sure. Yep. Well, thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks, man. Thank you, and we'll talk to you next time, everybody. Thanks for listening.